All right, in this video, I want to offer, as best as I can, an objective evaluation of the two types of lathe tools that you may buy if you're a wood turner. The first is what's typically referred to as high-speed steel, although you can also buy cheap ones that are not high-speed steel. They look like this. The second is what's typically called carbide, which look like this. And I'm essentially making the kind of video that I wish I had found when I was getting into this, because when I get into a new hobby, I find that I have questions that others don't. I just approach things from a different angle. And so oftentimes I'm very frustrated that I can't find answers to what seem to be simple questions. And that may just be me, and that's fine. That may not be you, no problem. But if you're like me and you're bewildered or frustrated or confused about wood turning, then maybe this will be helpful for you. Okay, first a quick history lesson. Tools, basically all lathe tools used to be made out of steel, and high-speed steel holds an edge longer, and it can be sharpened without overheating as much. So historically, all the tools were high-speed steel. And at some point along came tungsten carbide, other types of carbide, and they started being used for machining. And when it became cost effective, they made their way into wood turning. I just remember one other thing I want to write here, wild card. And they have now made their way into wood turning. And so there's several different things to consider when you're thinking about one of these tools. And so I want to take you through that so that you can decide what makes sense for you. Okay, the first category I want to talk about is cost. So the way that I like to buy my high-speed steel tools is by buying the blade only. If you go to Amazon and you type in blade only woodworking or wood turning tools, you will find one of the most reputable names in the industry, Robert Sorby, where they just sell you the blade. And they're very economical. So you can get a 1/2-inch spindle gouge for $50. You can get a spindle roughing gouge for $30. And you can use these tools without handles, and then you can make handles for yourself, which is a great beginner project. It's very satisfying to use something that you've made yourself, and it's a very inexpensive way to get started and buy very high quality tools. And I'm trying to be fair as I do my comparison. So I've compared Robert Sorby, which is one of the biggest traditional names in high-speed steel lathe tools, and then I'm comparing Easy Wood tools, also on Amazon. I've owned a couple, I don't own any more, and what they call a mid-size Easy Rougher costs $130. So over here you have $130 to get started, and over here you have something like $30 to $50. So from a cost perspective, high-speed steel takes the cake. Now, one of the worst things about our society is that we think better things cost more money. And so you may think, well, you get what you pay for, right? And people always tell me to buy the highest quality tools that I can afford. And so if I can afford this, I should get this. And I think that that's a bullcrap perspective and a bullcrap answer. I hate that people in our society say buy the best possible tools you can afford. I hate that advice. I mean, it's right sometimes, but it's wrong a lot of times. And of course, I hate the idea that we think that more expensive things are always better than less expensive things. Okay, moving on. The next topic is cut quality. So a high-speed steel cutting tool, they come at different angles. This is an angle gauge that my lovely wife bought me, and this is something like 40 degrees, okay? On a skew chisel, also, I think this one's a little bit off. So this one, whoops, wrong way. This one I didn't get quite right. This one's at about 30 degrees, okay? If you remember geometry, you have acute and obtuse and all of that. So basically, the thinner, like a fish fillet knife, the better it's gonna cut, but the shorter the edge will have in terms of lifespan, because you'll beat it up. Now, you know you're looking at a carbide tool. In case you're not sure how to distinguish the difference, basically a carbide tool at the end will have one of these little things. It might be round, it might be triangular, but it's gonna be like this. It's gonna have a little screw, and it's probably gonna have 4 faces that are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now if you look at this angle, it's, I don't know exactly what it is, maybe 60 or 70 degrees, but it's way more obtuse. It's not literally obtuse, but it's going in the obtuse direction, okay? Now, forget what you know about the words cut and scrape for a moment, unless you're a wood turner. But in wood turning, when you use the word cut and when you use the word scrape, you're referring to two different techniques. Just like in the normal world, we distinguish between cutting and sanding, even though you're both removing material in either case. Now, scraping as a technique is not new with carbide. It's been around for a long time, and they have high-speed steel scrapers. And scrapers have this super almost 90-degree angle, and they're good for getting at the bottom of certain bowls that you may be doing. And they're kind of a safer choice because they don't grab as much. And so they are used by all wood turners to scrape under certain circumstances. I won't get into details on that. That's not what this is about. But what I want to say is that because of the angle of these carbide cutters, carbide tools do not cut wood. They scrape wood. Again, I'm using vernacular from the wood turning industry, but they scrape wood. Now, there's a couple problems with scraping wood. The first thing is that it's a slower process because the angle's not that good, and so you can't, it's not as smooth, it's not as efficient. Think of sanding a piece of wood in half versus cutting it in half. One's going to be way slower than the other. That's one problem. The second issue is that the finish will not be as good. It will not be as smooth because you basically scraped the surface and tore fibers instead of cutting them. Now, you may say, well, I don't care about that. I'll just do the sanding. That's fine. Okay, one thing about sanding. So there's basically two types of wood turning. There's spindle turning and faceplate turning. And that's basically if you're doing, like, think of a baseball bat or a salad bowl, okay, in two extreme. When you're doing spindle turning, this thing is moving in this direction like this. Now, it's fine to use sandpaper on the lathe with this thing spinning, but you're sanding across the grain. And so I don't know if you can see this, but I sanded across the grain because I don't care that much about this tool. And you can see the scratch marks. It's actually pretty hard to see in here, but you can see scratch marks in this direction. So if you're making really nice stuff that you really care about the finish, you are not gonna sand as it's spinning like this. You're gonna stop the lathe and you're gonna run the sandpaper in this direction. Furthermore, as you get into more and more intricate shapes, it's gonna be harder and harder to get sandpaper in there in this direction and to get it smooth. So the other thing is most people don't become a wood turner because they want to do a bunch of sanding. Actually, here you can see these vertical lines better. So I made these quickly and I didn't care about the surface finish so much, so that's why I was a little bit sloppy with the sanding. Okay, so cut quality, I'm going to subjectively say is, 3 times better with high-speed steel than with carbide, because with carbide you're always scraping. Okay, next one, ease of use. This immediately and unanimously goes to the carbide tool. And this is a huge advantage to carbide with a caveat that I'll explain in a moment. And let me show you why. I'm gonna pretend that this is my tool rest, and I'm going to rest my carbide tool on it. Okay, with a carbide tool, all you do is push in to cut more and out to cut less, and then you move over and do it here or here, like this, okay? And you can obviously do it in one swooping motion, this kind of thing, right? Like this. That's all you do. You never drop the tool. Actually, that's probably hard for you to see. So you never drop the handle like that. You never tilt it up or down. You never do that. You always keep it 90 degrees. And you never rotate it this way. Okay, so there's basically 2 motions you never do. You basically move side to side and in and out. And you can swing the tool in this direction to get different shapes, but that's not really. Okay, with a high-speed steel tool, especially a bowl or spindle gouge, you have to control 4 movements: the push-pull, the lift and drop, this motion, which I'm doing this with my hand. Then you have to control the twist and you have to control the swing, because like to do a circle, you have to be swinging in order to get the right shape. There is way more to think about in terms of technique with a high-speed steel tool. What's worse is that the technique used on a bowl gouge is totally different than what's used on a skew. And it's similar to what's used on a spindle gouge or a spindle roughing gouge. And I'm just looking over at my tools, what else I have. So you have several different techniques you're gonna have to learn. So not only is the technique more complicated with the tool, but the techniques are different from tool to tool. Now, here comes the caveat. Only you know yourself. If you're the sort of person who wants to buy something and use it proficiently the next day, then Carbide clearly takes the cake in this case. But if you are the sort of person who wants to acquire the sort of skills in life that a brand new rookie cannot have after buying something and using it for 5 minutes, then high-speed steel actually takes the cake. And that's where I fall in. When I use a tool, I like it when years of experience and practice are evident in my use of the tool. I like it when someone else can't just pick it up and do it exactly like I did. And it's not a pride thing. It's that there's a satisfaction that comes with getting better and better and better at something. Okay? And when you look at the world's best skateboarders or skiers or whatever, you know, what we admire in them is not that the skateboard is easy to use. It's that it's hard to use. It's dangerous to use, and they've mastered it. And so if you only care about the product that you have at the end from the lathe, and you don't care at all about developing technique or learning and growing with each tool, then I would say for this category, Carbide is better. But if you're like me and you like and enjoy that, then that's part of the fun, and high-speed steel takes the case. Okay, ease of sharpening. This is kind of difficult to compare because, okay, first of all, ease of sharpening goes to Carbide, but it's a little bit difficult to compare because when you're using a bowl gouge, Stuart Batty will say that you're cutting something like a mile of wood every minute. And so he sharpens like every 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that. By the way, Stuart Batty, I'll write it down for you. He is the man. My favorite woodworker. Actually, you know what? I'll put a PDF in the description, which really helped me with my wood turning. You can look him up on YouTube. He doesn't have a huge presence, but he's one of the best of the best of the best. I love the guy. Okay, back to the topic. So you will sharpen these often. And so that influences what I'm calling ease of sharpening is the frequency. And here's the thing, they are a pain in the butt to sharpen. In fact, I recommend that before you buy a high quality, high-speed steel bowl gouge, you buy the crappiest one you can find, preferably used, and learn to sharpen. I have literally ground away centimeters and inches, I mean literally years of life off of this tool because I was learning how to do it, and I made lots and lots of mistakes. And I am something of a sharpening nerd. I have tons of sharpening equipment. I have Japanese Waterstones that go to the 10,000 grit. I love looking at knife blades under a microscope and getting them to the point where they, you know, will cut magazine paper folded over with ease. And I will admit that it took a lot of time to learn how to sharpen these. In fact, I do most of my wood turning in the winter, and I almost have to reteach myself how to sharpen every time. Okay, on a Carbide tool, I'm just going to use this because it's easier to hold. On a Carbide tool, you have 4 faces like this, and you rotate them when they start to get dull. And so you just loosen the screw, rotate it, tighten the screw again. It's piece of cake. And because it's Carbide instead of steel, it doesn't dull as quickly. And then basically when all 4 sides are done, you chuck it, you buy a new one. Now, in that sense, Carbide clearly takes the case for ease and frequency. The cost of sharpening is also tricky to compare because in order to sharpen high-speed steel bowl gouges, as an example, you need a grinder and you're gonna want a decent wheel. I have a diamond wheel. And you're gonna need some sort of fixture. I use the one-way Wolverine setup, which I think is really good. And so you're gonna have $400, $500, $600 in sharpening equipment. On the other hand, it's no cost to you every time you use it. With a carbide, every time you finish using up a carbide, you have no choice but to just replace it. And some of these are quite expensive, like $15, $20, depending on what brand and depending on what quality. So with high-speed steel, you have a higher initial upfront costs, and here you have running costs, which are more expensive. So I don't really know, because I've not used enough carbide to know the consumption rate of the carbide to know the yearly costs. So I'm going to say they're both expensive, but for different reasons. Okay, learning curve. Learning curve kind of goes back to what I was saying about ease of sharpening, ease of use. But what I want to say about learning curve is you will be proficient with a carbide tool very quickly. The problem is once you're proficient, you can't get better with it. It's like, that's it. You learn how to do it, game over. It's boring. And high-speed steel will take you, you will be learning high-speed steel techniques, using them, sharpening them, sort of till the day you die. And so again, I knew a guy who was a wood turner, and he couldn't have cared less about the tools or the technique or how he got the finished piece. He just cared about the finished piece. And I'm the kind of guy who likes to say, like, yep, I didn't even have to sand because my finish quality was, or my cut quality was so good, or I only used 2 tools to do this. Like, I'm more interested in sometimes the methods than the final product. And so I actually enjoy that every year I become better with high-speed steel. And so that may be you, and so I think high-speed steel has the advantage, or that may not be you, and so I think carbide has the advantage. It really just depends on you as a person. My dad has a fine arts degree. He made my mom's wedding ring, and he would show off a product that he made, and he couldn't care less how he made it. So he wouldn't be bragging about the cut quality. He would just say, this is what I made. I'm, again, more into the method. So these are totally different people. Okay, satisfaction. So what I mean by satisfaction is kind of what I've already been saying, which is there is a real deep sense of satisfaction when you get this guy super sharp and you do wonderful cuts through a bowl, and the chips or the strands are just coming off this thing, which they don't on scrapers because of the angle, and you just get a beautiful cut. I mean, it's just so satisfying. And I've never had that with carbide, and I don't know people who have had that with carbide. I have like 5 wood turning friends. One of them was dedicated carbide, the other one is basically dedicated high speed, and then the other 3 of us are kind of like halvesies. I use these for like roughing extremely nasty wood, which is dirty and filthy, and I don't want to damage these. So you may find satisfaction in being able to use these things from the first day you bought them, so check mark for you. Or on the contrary, you may find satisfaction in high-speed steel over the long haul as you learn to use them. Okay, the last thing I want to say, and this is maybe the most important thing that I can say, this is my wild card. I am a very mechanically minded person. I like mechanisms, I like techniques, I like honing a skill. And so I almost enjoy the sharpening and the cutting and the tuning of my wood turning tools and the cutting process as I do having a finished vase at the end to give to my wife. If that's you, then I would go with high-speed steel. My father is the exact opposite. I mean, he hates when things get dull or when things get worn out or when the bandsaw's out of, I mean, he hates it. He just wants things to work, because my dad is much more interested in the end product than the process. And so if that's you, I would go with carbide. And what I do really appreciate about carbide is that I think because of these tools, there's a group of people who would have never stuck with wood turning because the sharpening and the techniques are so cumbersome and so frustrating and so aggravating, they just give up. But this allows them to wood turn because they just rotate it. It's simple, it's easy, it's a little bit more expensive, but they get to do it. And I know one person in specific who never would have been a wood turner if it wasn't for carbide. And so for that, my hat's off to carbide. It's not who I am, it may not be who you are, but I appreciate that because of this technology, there's a group of people who can get into wood turning who otherwise, I'm quite confident, would have given up. Okay, It's a pretty boring video. You've been looking at a few pieces of paper this whole time and watching me move tools into the camera shot and move them away again. So if you didn't like this, I get it. I don't blame you. Give it a thumbs down. Let me know. Go check out Stuart Batty. He's from England. Stuartbatty. He's like a third generation wood turner. Awesome guy. So good with technique. Look at the description I have underneath here, or look at the link in the description to his PDF. Learn about his 7 fundamental rules. So helpful. And you may not like his style, you may not like what he makes, but they say that nobody understands the sort of the technical aspects of cutting wood on a lathe like he does. And I personally have found that to be true. So go check him out. I hope this was helpful for you. It's the kind of video that I wanted to watch when I got into wood turning and I couldn't find it. And after 6 years of doing it and spent money and ruining chisels, I've learned a lot. And so I'm hopeful that it can be helpful to you too. All right, folks, take care.